Well, congratulations to BTS on the opening of the new album, Map of the Soul Persona. As of right now, I understand that after 6 hours, BTS's new album is number one in 70 countries. I also saw that there was a um, announcement that it has already gone gold in Australia. Um, And so I'm going to talk about BTS and all the new songs, at least as far as I can. I started to look at the various verses or the various songs, and I don't know too much yet. I did take a good look at Microcosmos and the words in Microcosmos, but I haven't, and I also saw Boy in Love Halsey, which is terrific. I really like that. And uh, good morning, everyone. And so I'm just bringing up my other iPhone so I'll be able to respond to your tweets and or to your chat. And so that's going to take me just a minute to get it up. And so my plan today is first to uh, very briefly read 3 pages of Mary Stein's book, um, Jung's Map of the Soul, an Introduction, which is the basis for the Map of Soul Persona album. And then I'm going to talk about the various songs, and then I'll be also responding to your tweets. So welcome Tata, Van Gogh, and Art Patterson. Um, and Art was able to get BTS on Spotify, so that's good. And so today I've worn my purple shirt in honor of the new album. It's very exciting. As I understand, as I said, it has gone number one in 70 countries, and it's only been released about 6 hours ago. So this is going to be a phenomenon. Um, and thank you for the compliment on my shirt. It does look good on the iPhone. When I wear it on my iMac, it washes it out very much, but on the iPhone it looks good. So anyway, um, okay. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to uh, very quickly read this section. Now I'm referring to Jung's Map of the Soul, an Introduction by Mary Stein, which seems to be the basis for the Map of the Soul Persona album. And then I'm going to go into what I've seen so far of the songs, and I'm also going to talk about the story because one of my subscribers in Brazil and I have been talking about what the BTS story means. And that's very, very interesting, and I'll be telling you about that in a few moments. But first, let me read this bit from Mary Stein. So I'm on page 138 of his book, and I'm going to read today from a section, The Development of the Anima, Us. And so his point is that it's either the anima or the animus, and the anima is found normally in men as the dominant feature, and in men, the inferior feature would be the animus. On the other hand, in women, the dominant feature is the animus, and the inferior feature is the anima. So I'll just read this 3 pages, and then we'll come back and have a chat. So, the development of the anima, us. It is precisely the above lack of development and inferiority, however, that gives the anima and animus such potential for further development in the psyche. Because the persona is based on collective values and features, whatever happens to be in the way of male and female behavior and attitudes at a given moment in culture, the potential for becoming unique as an individual resides not in the persona, but elsewhere in the psyche. As long as a person's ego consciousness is identified with the persona and feels at one with it, there is no room for qualities of personality and expression of individuality that would depart from the collective images. The impulse to be an individual is suppressed or repressed altogether for the sake of adaptation in order to fit in. What these individual qualities may be in a particular case cannot be determined by examining the persona. They may be somewhat included in the persona presentation, or they may be almost completely excluded. This is a fundamental rule which my experience has borne out over and over again. As regards individual qualities, nothing can be deduced about them from the persona. We can only be certain that when a man is identical with his persona, his individual qualities will be associated with the anima. This is the man in the gray flannel suit who rides the train to work every morning and is so closely identified with his collective role that he has no personality outside of its framework. His inherent uniqueness will show up in the anima. He will be, perhaps secretly, attracted by extremely unconventional women because they carry the anima projection for him. They portray his soul. They capture his spirit of adventure and daring. Precisely the same rule holds true for women. When they are collective and conventional in their persona presentations, they harbor a secret inner lover, often unconscious to them, who is anything but the portrait of their conventional mate. When he appears, he will mesmerize them and lead them into abandon. This fundamental rule of the psyche can be observed operating in life, and it is portrayed in countless novels, operas, and films. The outcome of an actual encounter with someone who is a carrier of the anima or animus projection frequently gives rise in dreams to the symbol of psychic pregnancy, a symbol that goes back to the primordial image of the hero's birth. The child that is to be born signifies the individuality, which, though present, is not yet conscious. The real psychic purpose of the conventional man's affair with his very unconventional anima woman is to produce a symbolic child, which represents a union of the opposites in his personality and is therefore a symbol of the self. It is this encounter of the ego with the anima or animus that Jung thought was so rich with potential for psychological development. The meeting with the anima animus represents a connection to the unconscious even deeper than that of the shadow. In the case of the shadow, it is a meeting with the disdained and rejected pieces of the total psyche, the inferior and unwanted qualities. In the meeting with the anima animus, it is a contact with levels of the psyche which has the potential to lead into the deepest and highest, at any rate the furthest reaches that the ego can attain. In order to pursue this intuition, however, Jung had to change course and begin to redefine the nature of the anima animus. The shadow does not usually lead one much past the parts of the psyche rejected from the persona, unless it takes one to an encounter with absolute evil. The anima animus structure, on the other hand, has the potential to bridge to the self, a much further reach. The anima animus cannot then be simply the converse of the persona, or sort of negative reflection of the collective attitudes of the times. It must be more deeply anchored in the collective unconscious and in the structures of archetype and archetypal image. Its roots must extend further out and down into the depths than those of the shadow. In 1921, Jung was just on the verge of tracking these trails into the hinterland of the collective unconscious. He gives a hint of what is to come. Quote, in the same way as the persona, the instrument of adaptation to the environment is strongly influenced by environmental conditions. The anima is shaped by the unconscious and its qualities. Here, the concept of the anima changes a small but highly significant bit. Instead of simply being the complement of the persona, and therefore critically shaped and colored by what is in the persona, the anima is now seen as shaped by the unconscious and its qualities. Later, when Jung comes to conceive of the animus and anima as archetypal images which receive their forms from the spiritual end of the psychic spectrum, see chapter 4, he will conclude that the anima animus is shaped by the archetype more than by the collective consensus of the time. The anima and animus will become enduring forms of psyche, powers that shape the psyche as much as they are shaped by it, dynamic forces that can break the forms of culture and impose their own agendas upon a surprised and sometimes unwilling ego. And I would also say a surprised and sometimes unwilling culture, too. Let me just take a quick look at your chats here. I just wanted to see if there's anything wrong here. And Kislev says, sir, you think that Halsey is the anima of Bangtan? Yes, I do think so. And I'll explain why in a minute. She's the anima of a lot of people. And Joy says, I think she is the physical representation of Army, maybe. Yes, maybe so. And Cereza, the Boy with Love music video isn't part of the Bangtan universe. Check the video description. All videos part of the BU are signalized in the description. Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by that, because, I mean, I looked at that video, and it certainly looked like a music video for the album, but I'll come back to that. And someone says, hello, I believe that Halsey is Jimin's anima, since they have the same hair color. Okay, well, maybe so. So let me just finish up this passage that I'm reading to you, and then we'll come back and have a conversation. Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman. Not the image of this or that particular woman, but a definitive feminine image. Jung writes in 1925 in an essay on marriage. That's what Jung wrote in 1925. This has come to be the more or less standard definition of the anima in analytical psychology. Here, Jung is pointing to the archetypal nature of the anima animus, and he leaves aside the way in which this inner attitude is complementary to the persona. He goes on to say that this is an hereditary factor of primordial origin and offers an image of woman as she appears to man and not as she is in herself. Similarly, the animus is a woman's internal image of the male personality. The images, thoughts, and assumptions generated by these internal structures are behind all the confusions and obfuscations between men and women. They misunderstand one another because they are often relating to the images of the other sex rather than to actual people. It is evident how these inner structures can distort reality and cause misrepresentations between otherwise fairly rational and well-meaning individuals. The male and female images housed in the unconscious of each gender, respectively, are primordial and relatively unchanged by historical and cultural circumstance. They are close to permanently stable images that repeat their portraits in individual human psyches from generation to generation. What confused Plato and Socrates about women is the same as the anima image that creates pitfalls for men today. And the expectations and longings that filled the heart of Mary Magdalene continue to infiltrate the consciousness of modern women in spite of the vast cultural and social distances that separate them. The animus is the great creator of illusion that provides chuckles for the jaded and heartbreak for the naive. The projection-making factor is the anima, or rather the unconscious is represented by the anima. Jung writes from the vantage point of old age in 1950 in Ion, where he attempts to offer once again a definition of this elusive inner factor. Jung had always held that projections are created by the unconscious and not by the ego. We are not responsible for our projections, only for not becoming conscious of them, taking them back, or analyzing them. They occur spontaneously and create a view of the world and of reality that is based on unconscious images and structures, rather than on tested perceptions of reality. Jung now locates the origin of all projections in the animus, thereby highlighting the dynamic and native nature of this psychic factor. We are, of course, projecting constantly, and our views of life, of other people, and of the way the world is constructed are made up, quite importantly, of unconscious contents that are projected into the environment and clung to as absolute verities, in other words, absolute truths. The animus, Jung says in this passage, is like Maya, the Indian goddess who creates illusory worlds, and the ego ends up inhabiting a world that is largely based on projections. Jung had learned this not primarily from study of Eastern religions, but from his own first-hand experience as a psychiatrist and analyst. It is amazing how distorted some people's views really are, and it is equally remarkable that all of us believe in our own views absolutely, even when we find serious flaws in them. It is rare that we question a set of basic assumptions. Okay, so that's the section I wanted to read today, and you will find it beginning on page 138 of Mary Stein's Map of the Soul, Jung's Map of the Soul, and Introduction, which is the basis of the new BTS album. And what I would also add is that there is an audible.com version of this entire book, which you can get from audible.com. I have it. I've had it for many years. I've listened to it many times, and I urge you to, if you like listening to Audible books, then I suggest you purchase that one. But you're probably also going to need a hard copy. I found I did, because although until a couple of weeks ago I had always relied on the audible.com version, when I started to think about how I could support the BTS Army and BTS's inroad into this area, I realized that I better go back and reread it. So I have been re-listening to it, and I realized that I really need to be able to refer to specific sections in this book. So that's why I purchased the hard copy. And so let me just see your comments, and then we'll go on to the next part. So Bangtan Universe is the storyline. Videos that are part of the storyline say BU content certified by Big Hit Entertainment in the description. Okay, I'm going to give you a Jungian perspective on that in a minute. Based on very little information, but as I've said, I'm in the on 99th percentile on the intuitive scale, so I think I've got it. But I don't know everything, I admit that, so I'll look forward to your corrections. And so Katie says the Bangtan universe is their storyline, which includes notes in the album and not music videos. So not every music video is necessarily part of this universe storyline. Joy says the BU universe, the ideas are the videos that are separate from other videos. The concepts tie together and tell a greater story of Jeanne and the others. It can also be seen in the webtoon Save Me. Hello, sir. Glad to see you live. Central Bush says, hello, love it that RM mentions Icarus in the lyrics. Absolutely. And also mentions that this Icarus, they as Icarus, aren't flying near to the sun, which is what Icarus did in mythology, and therefore his wings melted, and or the wax that held his wings together melted, and he fell to the earth and died. But this Icarus of BTS is pointing to the sun of someone else, an anima or an animus, and that sun won't make your wings melt, ideally, although metaphorically that could be true. Central Bush says, can't stay long today, but we'll watch later. Thank you for these live streams. Teresa, I'd love to hear an analysis of the girls in the highlight reels short films as the anima of every boy. Maybe some theories as to why Hosiak and Jimin share one anima. Okay, well, that's what I'm going to get to here in a moment. And Jerome says, how do you become aware of your projections? Well, I'll give you an example of how I became aware of my anima. Because when I started my group, among many other experiences, but when I started my group, I had one woman in the group who had long brown hair, and when she was in the room, it was like I was in a tunnel of clouds or something like that. I couldn't see anybody else in the group. I could only see this woman, and I was communicating directly with her and she with me. And my psyche would not see anybody else in the room unless I really forced myself away from looking at this woman. So obviously she was fulfilling the anima in me, and that's what happens to you when you have this love at first sight. When you see something and you know that's the person for you, that's your anima or your animus talking. And but the issue is that I already have a wife, and she's actually my second wife. And if I think about it, my first wife had hair exactly like this woman, and my second wife had hair exactly like this woman. And so suddenly I went back and I looked at an old picture of my mother from when she was 18 years old, and she was quite lovely. I've actually shown that on some earlier videos before last Monday. So before the Sammy's video, you'll find me talking about my mother as my anima, and I actually show you a picture of her. And I realized that structure of this woman with long brown hair is exactly what my anima is. So if I see a woman like that, my anima says, that's the woman for you. And it's very hard to get control of. As I said, when I started this reading group, this woman came into the group, and interestingly enough, she's sex therapist, and and oh my God, this tunnel of it was like a moving psychedelic tunnel, but only between she and me. And so it was like a love at first sight, but that was an anima projection. And so it's only with experience that you can understand that and control that. And if you learn something about Dr. Jung's life, if you go see the movie A Dangerous Method, which I highly recommend, it's one of my favorite movies. I've probably watched it 15 times. You'll see what I mean, because before his breakup with Freud, in fact, before his time with Freud, he had a patient named Sabine Spielrein, and he was working with her for a couple of years, but at some point, as depicted in the movie, of course, the Jungian analysts of the world deny this because they want Dr. Jung's history to be totally pure. And so there's a lot of revisionist history in Jungian analysis or Jungian analyst community. But he had a love affair with Sabine Spielrein, as near as I can tell. And there are various things that have indicated that he had that love affair. And his wife cut it off, okay? And she cut it off by writing to Freud, and Freud then challenged him on it. And so then Sabine Spielrein, who obviously had an animus projection with Dr. Jung, went up to Vienna and then had some sort of relationship with Sigmund Freud. Nobody knows quite what. But ultimately, she married a Russian man. She was a Russian as well, and they went back to I don't remember the name, but anyway, to a Russian city where she was killed during World War II, sadly. But as that affair was ending, as you see at the end of that movie, the movie is called A Dangerous Method, and you can get it on demand or Netflix probably. There is a scene at the end where he's talking about his next anima connection, which was with Tony Wolff. And basically, he had a menage a trois going between himself, his wife, and Tony Wolff for about 40 years until her death. And it's rather funny to look into the hardbound copy of Man and His Symbols, which was the book that was written for laymen, and it was edited by Marie-Louise von Franz, who was a close disciple of his. And in that book, I think it's on about page 25, you will find a picture of a conference of psychoanalysis from 1911. It's the so-called Weimar Conference of 1911. And in the front row of that picture is a whole group of women, many of whom are not identified in Man and His Symbols. And that includes Tony Wolff. And it also includes a woman named Maria Maltzer, who was also a figure in Dr. Jung's life in the middle, about 100 years ago, a century ago. And Maria Maltzer became a psychoanalyst herself and was a nun, as I understand it. But anyway, let me go back to these. So Mianica says Icarus was also insinuated in their MV Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Yes, I saw that. And Art, how does this work in a same-sex relationship? What I would say, Art, is that it probably works more or less the same way in the sense that all of our psyches have unconsciously each of us on the scales of all opposites. There are literally millions of opposites that can be in your psyche, but the anima and animus are that scale is a big scale, and so in my view, or it's an important scale, and so in my view, what happens is that people who are not heterosexual, there'll be one partner who's farther out on the animus scale and one that's nearer into the animus scale, or the animus side of the scale. And so basically, that connection that they develop between themselves becomes a man-woman relationship, but in the psyche, having nothing to do with gender per se. And so, uh, there's nothing that I can say that's wrong with that. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with that. That's a mental health issue. But, most people are born with, if you're a physical man, you're born with a anima that's stronger. If you're a physical woman, you're born with an animus that's stronger. And those things connect and sometimes clash and sometimes cause problems because, as I described earlier, you uh, if your anima, you're married, and then your anima says that's the woman for you, and it's a different woman for your wife, obviously that can lead to complications unless you're very, very mature. And in my own case, I can say that um, when I met my second wife after 17 years of marriage, um, she and I communicated for 4 months by email. Now, this was about 10 years before the World Wide Web got going. It was back when only a few small email servers were around. It was even before CompuServe. So, and this was 1985. So, I've often said that we're the first couple, or maybe one of the first five couples, to meet online and marry. And so, we communicated by email for 4 months. Um, my first wife didn't know anything about that really. And in 4 months, I knew my new wife better than I knew my first wife after 17 years. That's what happened. And so after 4 months, I left my happy family of three daughters and my wife and uh, moved 375 miles away and moved basically into a second marriage. Ultimately, we were married 3.5 years later. It took some time to get divorced, um, but in any case, that was an anima projection and a connection that was made. And once that new connection was made, there was no going back for me. Sometimes there is. And so that's where marriages sometimes get in trouble and why it's very good to understand psychology and so that you know what's happening to you. And it's a very important thing to understand. Um, if I knew at that time in 1985 what I know today and what I'm trying to present to my audience every time I do a video, if I knew then what I know now, I probably would not have divorced because what I now understand is that I'm going through and I was then going through different stages in my development. And that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute. And so I had gone through many stages in my development because I was out in the business world and so on. But my first wife was a stage or two behind me. she wanted me to be her father. Her father was a brilliant man, and he was very much um, a Mr. Fix-It guy who took care of the house and liked to do gardening and so on. And I've had allergies to everything that's green and grows for my whole life. My father had to be stationed on the Mojave Desert in California for 3 years when I was 2 years old initially, um, to cure me of asthma. And it turned out later, uh, this is a long while back, that we now know that that asthma was caused by allergies. But it wasn't known then. And so the Navy, in its infinite wisdom, assigned my father to a Navy base that's in the middle of the desert, and my asthma was cured magically. Um, and so that was terrific of the Navy, and I'm very grateful for that. Um, but what it meant for me in my first marriage was that I couldn't be like my first wife's father because he was very happy, always out on the lawn doing things on a lawnmower, and every time I did it, um, I would push the lawnmower up the side of a hill or something, and then I'd have a huge sneezing fit, and the lawnmower would go around and around and almost kill me. So I never liked to be Mr. Fix-It outside, and you can still hear it in my voice because I still have allergies, and I have to take 2 allergy shots every 2 weeks, or every week in the summertime, but every 2 to 4 weeks in the winter, to keep my allergic problems under control. And so that's one of the reasons why I have a gravelly voice. Moving on. Um, and let's see. Uh, Angel says, I thought Jung had an affair with Christiana Morgan. Now, Christiana Morgan was the basis of a 5 year seminar that Dr. Jung did, the so called visioning seminar, which is a 2 volume set if you buy that seminar. And so she obviously was a very important patient in his life. But I have to admit that I have not had time in my life so far to go back and get the details of what was going on in the relationship with Dr. Jung and Christiana Morgan. So I don't um, I don't deny what you say, Angel. I just don't know, and I'm not going to tell you something I don't know. Carlos says your admiration for this K-pop album is very similar to an admiration I possess for heavy metal and rock music. Well, each to his own, but maybe you'll get uh, admiration for this music once you understand what it is doing, because it is changing the world. I'm convinced of that. And as I said, I turned on my cell phone this morning and found that in the first 4 hours, I think, they were #1 in 70 countries. Army Love says, hello, sir. Can't stay long. Sorry, I have to stream, but going to watch this again. Jerome, uh, to Art Patterson, skip read in a previous video, Soul Image Animus, page 808 and 9 of Psychological Types, that covers same-sex relation to projections. Right. Okay. And so, anyway, okay. So I think I'm caught up with your chats. So let me talk about the storyline for a minute, because the storyline, it seems to me, is very important. And yesterday in my video, I read the description of the storyline of BTS's albums from the beginning. And it was written by one of my subscribers named Cynthia Perez, And so thank you, Cynthia, for that. Okay, and so this morning when I was looking at various things, and I've been communicating with a couple of others of the BTS Army about this, it suddenly dawned on me what the story is. And so it's what the story is an archetypal story because Cynthia explained that um, the first set of albums was about the schoolboy era, and then the next set was the most beautiful moment era, which was sort of an awakening to being alive, let's say, and then the wings area, which is, as my friend Bill says, it's a coming of age novel, Damien is. And so they're coming of age. And then the fourth era is the love yourself era, which is to respect what you are and what you can become. And now we have this new era, which is talking about Dr. Stein's book, which talks about the entire process for laymen. Dr. Stein's book was intentionally for laymen, but it's talking about the whole development of one's psychological life from beginning until death. And so what I realized this must be, and mind you, I have not gone back to look at the BU universe. I have not gone back to look at any of the earlier albums at all, with one exception. Um, and so I'm just doing this intuitively. But what I get from what Cynthia says and what my discussions with others say is that what they're doing is an archetypal process of everybody's psychological development. It isn't only the 7 members of BTS and their development. It's about your development. It's about every single person and in the whole world. And so when an artist can connect in to the archetypal level, that's when they're very successful. Okay, I'll give you an example. I took on, I started to paint and draw when I was 45 years old. I'd never been able to draw. I never got interested in it, in my teens or when I was a kid, really. I mean, there's one thing that I draw a lot of, and that's 5-pointed stars. But um, I have never been a drawer or an artist of that kind. And so I started to take in adult education a course in drawing and painting. And so the first thing they do is they give you a still life with an apple, an orange, a banana, a bunch of grapes in a dish. And they say, paint that, right? And so there's about 30 little old ladies in that group. And they're all trying to be very, very careful and get this perfect. And oh, I want to be so good. I want it to be just perfect. And the problem of what they're doing is they're trying to be a camera. And we have cameras for that. We don't need a camera or we don't need a poorly performed painting to show us what this still life is about. We have cameras for that. But what we need is the archetypal level and the unconscious level of how this still life affects you. And some of you will have seen a couple of my videos from maybe last week, for example. I showed this once, where I did a self-portrait of myself in Vietnam. And all I did was I drew an outline of my basic features onto a poster board, and then I just took a palette knife, not even a detailed brush, with a palette knife, I started to just throw paint onto the canvas, and uh, and I just did it as fast as I could. And that experience came directly from my unconscious. And when I was finished, that painting has everything that I have to say about the Vietnam War and my experience on active duty in the Marine Corps. Everything that I have to say about the Vietnam War is in that one painting. You may remember it. You can go back and find it on one of my earlier videos. And I will show it again. Because of this phenomenon that's going on, my equipment has died on me, so I had to upgrade the RAM of my iMac, and I had to get a new iPhone, which you're seeing, and I'm now able to follow your tweets, or oh, I'm now able to follow your chats on my other iPhone, and so I've been racing to get my equipment up to snuff. Now, if I was on my iMac, I would be able to show you this picture, but because I'm not, I can't do it right now. Oh, wait a minute, maybe, no, I don't think I can, because if I do, I'm going to disconnect from the chat, and I don't want to do that. So you can go find it in an earlier video, or I'll probably show it in the next couple of days from my OBS system so that you can see it. But in any case, the point is that an artist, you want an artist to tell us something from the unconscious or from the collective unconscious. And what BTS is doing is saying something very important from the collective unconscious. Okay, and what is it saying? It's a compensation for the way the world has been going. So around the world, we have authoritarian leaders, and those authoritarian leaders are trying to make a very constrained idea of what they want you to be. They want to educate you only enough math so that you can balance your checkbook, and only enough language so that you can speak in your own language. They don't want you to speak English, and they don't want you to speak anybody else's language, because then you might learn something. And so now these authoritarian leaders, including in the United States, are trying to be very closed about what they teach you. And so what Dr. Jung explained, and this happens in an individual psyche as well as in a society and a culture, what Dr. Jung explained is that this is a set of opposites. So if you have strict constraining in a psyche, then the compensation is going to come to you through dreams and visions. And so what we're seeing from BTS is the compensation for this authoritarian behavior coming through in the vision of BTS's albums, okay, the ones that I've seen and what I'm seeing now, because it's obviously needed in the world. We have to educate ourselves now, because our leaders won't teach us things. And so the only way to learn is by watching videos and that sort of thing. And I don't know, maybe public education is going to go away, because it's obviously becoming more and more irrelevant. When I hear about teenagers in the U.S. studying Korean now because they want to understand what BTS is saying. I mean, that's a big development. And there's a great TED Talk, I'm sorry I don't have the link for it right now, but by an Indian man who put a laptop in a nook in Chennai, formerly Madras, and he left it there for 2 months just to see what would happen and what the kids in the neighborhood would do. And when he came back 2 months later, a little 8-year-old boy came up to him and said, "We need a faster modem." So here's this 8-year-old boy who's taught himself enough about computers in one of the poorest areas of the world, taught himself enough to know that he needed a faster modem. And so um, the world's youth is teaching itself today. And what BTS is doing is teaching about many things. But one of the important things they're teaching, as far as I'm concerned, is Jungian psychology, which is the reason that I've done my videos for the last 3 years. And and the reason I started my website, which is called archetypeinaction.com, I guess I can put that link into the chat. I began it basically for artists because I knew that if you're like one of those little old ladies at that adult ed set thing and you're trying to be a camera, then nobody's going to buy your stuff. I mean, your grandchildren might put it on their refrigerator when you come visit, just so, to honor you as grandma. But nobody's going to buy your art and make you famous as an artist. And the only way to do work that is impressive is to do it from the soul, from your deep unconscious. And artists of all kinds, painters, writers, dancers, what have you, even me right now, this is my art and it's art from my soul. So when I'm talking to you, you are getting this directly from my unconscious. I haven't, other than reading the section of Dr. Stein's book, which I use as a way to get started. But once I start to respond to you and start to talk from my own experience, then you're getting it directly from myself, from my unconscious level, and not from my ego persona. I mean, okay, this is a kind of persona for me, but at least I know it's a kind of persona. And that's Kim Namjoon's point in the persona music video. Okay, that he knows he's got a persona out there when he's on the stage, but that's not really who he is. Okay, and I know that. And Dr. Stein commented that that's what he respected about Kim Namjoon's speech to the UN, which was that he had kept a connection between himself, his real self, and this persona that's out there. And we have to understand that in Jungian psychology, self is not what most people think about self, because most people around the world think of self as ego. But in Jungian psychology, ego is something else. Ego is your conscious mind, basically. But the self is in your deep unconscious, and it includes everything, going back to single-celled organisms. It includes all of these archetypes that have been there. So the other day I showed a image of a eagle mother sitting on a nest, and she's covered with snow. And she would not move off that nest for anything because she has 3 eggs under her that she's incubating. And so that is the mother archetype par excellence. And so that archetype came through the development of life long before there were human beings, long before. And most of these archetypes have come long before there were human beings. We're just part of the whole picture, and these archetypes have been laid down since there was a living single-celled organism. So, moving on. Um, and Right, okay. I'm sorry my phone vibration is distracting. That's the way it is. That's what I have. Um, and in order to do this at all, I have to have that. Um, Carlos says, "Can we see this painting?" You can see it in an earlier video, not in this one because I'm doing this off cell phones at the moment. But I will show it in a future video also. And but showed it on a couple of videos last week. So if you look at the earlier videos in this playlist, which is, I think I called it BTS Army Support, you'll find it in there. Um, Kyla says, "Is this vision the spirit of the times or the depths?" Um, I think that um, what you're seeing from BTS is the spirit of the depths emerging, because it's a breakthrough from what has been happening in the world with all this authoritarianism. Um, Watcher of the broad field, the internet really explodes the possibilities of self education. Absolutely. Sean, visionary is the collective truth that connects everyone instead of desire, which is singular. Yeah, I guess, I would have to concur with that. Jerome says, "I've got strength. I watched your video on Jung describing how he found his passion. Thanks." Um, and let's see, Sean says, "An artist sacrifices themselves into the one sidedness of life to achieve the archetypal image of their real self." And that's true. I mean, an artist, um, Picasso said, his father was an artist, and he said, "I could paint like Goya when I was 11, but then I had to learn how to paint like Picasso." So Pablo Picasso learned, like the little old ladies, to paint and to replicate Goya. So he could have gone through his life going to famous museums like the Louvre, or the famous one in Madrid, and copying somebody else's painting. And that wouldn't have been Picasso, that would be Picasso trying to be a camera. And so his point is that he could already paint like Goya. He could replicate a Goya painting when he was 11, but then he had to learn to paint from himself. And that's what made uh, his art so famous, because it also connected with everyone. And he went on and did that for the rest of his life. He died at, I think, 91 or 92, and he was still painting 4 hours before his death. And if you want to live an authentic life, live your life that way. Don't live your life the way somebody else lived their life. Live your life the way yourself tells you to live it. And, you know, teaching you what that means is a process I've been trying to do in 900 videos. So go back to JRG1. If you don't know anything about Jungian psychology, go back to the playlist called JRG1 and start going through the videos that I've made, because I teach you all the way through. And at this point, there's pretty much uh, almost a graduate level course in Jungian psychology that I've offered. So I hope you'll go back and do that. I've got strength as at first listen, the album sounded very Pink to me, except for Persona and Dionysus. A lot of people love Dionysus very much. It really conveys a feeling of God worshiping. Uh, Jerome, I think you tagged me by mistake. I don't have videos on Jung. Okay, so now I want to go back and talk about the album itself. But my point was that the story that is being told by BTS through their videos And everybody's been mysteriously trying to suss out what it is they're teaching. What they're teaching is the archetypal steps of every person's life, you and me. And that's why it's connecting. I mean, there years ago, 30 years ago, there was a catalog which you could now find online called the Sounds True catalog. And Sounds True has always published a lot of books and tapes on Jungian psychology and other philosophers. And the point was that if you hear something and it sounds true to you, then maybe it is true archetypally, whatever it is. And so what the reason that BTS is connecting, and especially with young people, is because those young people are going through the same phases in their lives, and it sounds true to them. So it's not only a fictitious character, it's not a fictitious character among the seven BTS guys, in my opinion. And I admit that I'm doing this on very limited knowledge. I'm a 99th percentile intuitive person. So what that means is I don't see what you can't see. If you're not as intuitive as I am, uh, I can't see what you see. And so I know what I know. And since I've been studying Jungian psychology for 32 years, I can tell you this is what I know, that they are giving you the archetypal steps of their lives in general, and those same steps are in you. And that's why they're connecting with so many people around the world, because what they're singing about and doing sounds true. It sounds like what's in your deep unconscious. That's what I believe. And so let's just see what you've said about that. Um, Sean says, I thought of a brilliant idea last night of a music memory journal. The idea is to write a journal entry of a specific person with notes opposed to words to make the people I meet timeless. Good idea, Sean. And that's how people become immortal, actually. Uh, and I've got strength says, Sean, do you mean describing people with music instead of words? And he says, yes, all the people I meet. Good idea, Sean. Um, and he's writing a song about his grandma now. Carlos says, perhaps someone who is as intuitive as you can see things you can't see, Skip. Um, well, okay, Carlos, the way it works is um, you have a scale within the MBTI. One end is sensing, and one end is intuitive. A sensing person, um, you can show them 1,000 trees, and they won't believe there's a forest. Um, and an intuitive person on the extreme other end, like me, you can show me 3 trees, and I assume there's a forest. And so when I communicate with you, um, unless you are as intuitive as I am, um, I have a blind spot all the way over to the sensing side, and I really don't know what of all the facts that you're looking at. I don't know which ones you're seeing and which ones you're not seeing. And if you're on the intuitive end of the scale with me, um, I don't know what's an actual fact and what you're assuming. Okay, I'm assuming, and I admit that, I'm assuming that my um, instinct about what this means in Jungian terms is correct. That's an assumption of mine. And I know that it's because I'm way out there on the intuitive scale. And it's also because um, I'm able to do that, I believe, because I am so intuitive. And with just the few facts that I've heard in the last 2 weeks as I've had time, uh, I am able to make that assumption. I get it. But, if somebody is on the far end of the scale that's a hypersensing person, uh, I'll never be able to tell them what I see or what I think sounds true, um, because they'll never believe me. And so everybody is somewhere on that scale from sensing to intuitive through intuitive. And it happens that I've been tested multiple times on the MBTI, and I'm way out there on the intuitive end, which traditionally has been uh, a function, a dominant function in women. And I know that. Okay. And so when I've served in the U.S. Marines, and I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Marines, um, we had to take the MBTI and get trained in every senior school. I went to 4 senior schools. I went to the Naval War College, um, the National War College, the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, and Command and Staff College in the Marine Corps. Those are 4 senior schools. And in every one of those schools, they spent a full day on the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And so I learned pretty much what it was about. Now, Jerome Waddle, who is one of the chatters here, is an expert about the MBTI, and he's a formally trained expert. I'm not a formally trained expert. I've been trained, but I wouldn't call me a MBTI teacher. So Jerome may take exception to me, um, but the point is, in the military, um, you want to be very sensing, and so 95% of all generals and admirals in the U.S. military are S. Okay, they're on the S end of the scale. And but because I was trained in being a Marine officer, when I put my uniform on, I can take that persona on. So that becomes a persona. So if you see me in uniform, you should assume that I'm STJ. Okay, and but in reality, my real type is NTP. And so, um, but as I say, because of my training, I'm able to take on the opposite end of that scale because I have been trained to it, as all Marines are. Um, and so, Carlos, the point is, I have no idea what facts you've seen about the BTS album, and I know I've only seen a very few, but I can make an assumption based on that. Grenade says, on the other hand, I'm intuitive on the MBTI and can make some faulty assumptions. And I acknowledge, Grenade, that my assumption that I've just conveyed to you may very well be faulty. Okay? And as I go forward, I'm going to be studying BTS more and more. And so as I study BTS more and more, I may find that my assumption right now is faulty. And I acknowledge that. But this was my insight this morning. So I'm sharing it with you live and raw. Jerome, I've got strength. Oops, it was. Okay, that's something else. Grenade. The interesting thing is it's weird to be able to predict some things and sometimes be right, but not know exactly how you knew. Okay, well, um, Peter Kingsley talks about a lot about prophecy in his new book, Catafalque, which I've shown you, but let me just grab it here. Okay, so this is Peter's new book. It's Catafalque by Peter Kingsley, and the subtitle of it is Carl Jung and the End of Humanity. And in this book, Peter Kingsley talks about prophecy and people not understanding how prophecy comes about. And prophecy comes about because you know something about history. And so, therefore, you know what can happen in the future. And you can say, wow, this looks a lot like X. So, in my case, I've seen a lot of popular bands come along ever since the Beatles or even since Elvis Presley. And so I can see what's going to happen. And even this morning, I'll be talking about most popular band tours in a few minutes. I can see exactly what's going to happen. And, there's a famous curse in Greek mythology, which is Cassandra's curse. And I suffer from Cassandra's curse. And Cassandra's curse was that she was cursed with the ability to see the future, but no one would believe her. And I can foresee the future, but no one will believe me. Or it takes people a long time to get what I'm talking about sometimes. And so I suffer from that curse. So um, what I'm predicting is that when we all study up on what this BTS album means, we're going to start to see that this series of albums is actually an archetypal series. As compared to Jungian psychology, it's an archetypal series that therefore relates to you and to me. It relates to everybody in the world. And so when everybody in the world looks at these videos and listens to these sounds, everybody has to be affected by it because it sounds true. That's my belief. Now that's my prediction, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But let's see whether it's true or not. I think it is, but who knows? Andrew says. So I've got strength. It would be interesting to know what percentage of those who will listen to the album will see how the theme of persona goes through songs, because Dionysus is their persona, but nothing points to it. Okay, yes, I agree, and we're going to see that heavily in this album. Um, Nothing points to it in the lyrics of the song. Okay. Sean says the persona you wear can overlap the paradox of your primary default characteristics. And Ion says, um, and so I agree with that. In other words, the persona you wear can overlap the paradox of your inferior functions, absolutely. And Ion says, Marines must love astrology then. Well, um, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily true. I certainly understand why astrology works as a divination technique, and I understand why Dr. Jung talked about astrology quite a lot, um, and that's a topic for a different day. Um, and I would say, and that most Marines who are STJ uh, are therefore also very rational, very much on the logos side, and therefore they don't believe in astrology. They think it's a bunch of hokum. And so Carlos says, I really admire your service. I have not served, but I have extensively studied military leadership and implement the same level of role ethics in my lifestyle. That's great. Carlos, I agree with your interpretations of BTS. However, I feel art of various forms also express the same message. Precisely, they do. That's why I created the Archetype in Action website, and I was trying to help young artists see that if you create art from the archetypal layer, you're going to have successful art. If you're not, it's going to be on your mother's fridge, but it's not going to be successful in the broader public. Jeffrey, Are there recent scientific research that supports Jung's theories about the psychic? Sure, there's lots. Uh, he actually wrote a book called Atom and Archetype with Nobel Prize physicist Wolfgang Pauli, and and his whole theory of synchronicity relates to physics, actually, at some layer. And so you need to go back and listen to all that. And actually, Dr. Stein does mention this in this book. So if you read Dr. Stein's Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction, you'll hear him or see him talking about Wolfgang Pauli and the scientific research. And I can say, I mean, Jung was very interested in ESP, and there were experiments in his time by a man, I think he was either at Duke or the University of North Carolina, who did research on ESP, and it was very convincing research. And I know myself, my wife and I were interested in understanding what ESP uh, is is and how it works. And so one weekend about 30 years ago, we went to a weekend conference about ESP specifically. And at the end of that weekend, I was totally convinced that ESP not only works, but it works everywhere if you know what you're looking at. And so, but it may be hard to prove a lot of things scientifically, because to prove something scientifically, you have to be over on the rational side of the equation, and you have to solve for x, and that means you rule out all variables. And the problem is, um, the psyche is the variables, and the psychic is the variables. So if you rule out the variables, you're also ruling out the psyche, and you're ruling out um, everything that applies to this. So you have to think about that. Um, and if you're solving for x, um, you know, Dr. Edinger explained that um, Jung, when he wrote a paragraph, and every one of his paragraphs is numbered, he considered that paragraph, and some of these paragraphs go for 2.5 or 3 pages, believe it or not. But every one of those paragraphs was a psychic fact. And so it has many things in it. So at the beginning of this, I did uh, a reading of his definition of individuation, and I compared that to Kim Nam-jun and his UN speech. And you might want to go back and listen to that. And so I read Dr. Jung's definition, which contains 10 primary items that I could pick out. And so um, that paragraph represents a psychic fact to Dr. Jung, but it had 10 major elements in it. That's not the way normal scientific research is done. And so, in order to do research on psychology and the psyche, then you have to be able to deal with complexity. And that's one of the things he got into with Wolfgang Pauli. Um, Renaud was saying predicting future patterns based on previous trends. Yes, he who doesn't understand history is destined to repeat it. An old saying, but it's very true, and it applies specifically to this. Um, and Grenade, yes, haha, I always have a fear of the future, especially in regards to artificial intelligence and the transition to. Well, as far as I can see, artificial intelligence has a long way to go. It works pretty well as long as you stay on the rational side, but in terms of the irrational, just take a look at the character Data in Star Trek The Next Generation. Um, Hunger got swamped by work, and then I saw everyone's reactions, and I saw the video. Joseph Campbell, did Jung ever experience something supernatural? He certainly did. And if you, I did a number of readings of the Red Book, and there's a playlist about that, which you can find on the homepage of my YouTube channel. And among other places, it is in the Seven Sermons to the Dead, and I read the Seven Sermons to the Dead into the YouTube channel some months ago, so you can find it there. Um, and I mean, there's an interesting story that I haven't told recently, which is that um, he, at one point, he heard and saw a troop of people like Boy Scout hikers go past his house. And he threw open the window and they weren't there. And then he was climbing in the Alps a few days later and he ran into an old shepherd. And the old shepherd said, "Oh, you ran into the such and such army," which is a vision that people in that part of Switzerland used to have frequently. And so in the future, people will have visions of the BTS Army, I'm sure. Um, and Grenade says yes and no because the experience is within the psyche. So, um, yes, such supernatural events are absolutely true. They are true in the psyche. They're not necessarily true in the physical world. Um, and so, in the first sermon of the dead, um, these pilgrims come back from Jerusalem, and the first thing that happens is they knock on Dr. Jung's door, and they said, um, "We have come from Jerusalem, where we did not find what we sought." And the significance of that is that if you go to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage and think you're only going to look at physical things, um, it's going to leave you cold. I mean, it's an interesting place. I've been there, and I've been to the Church of the Immaculate, or what is it? Church of the Holy Sepulchre and Solomon's Temple and so on. And it's quite an interesting place from a physical point of view and an architectural point of view, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But uh, it doesn't automatically give you a spiritual um, reaction, okay? And in order to have a religious experience is different from that. And actually, I've had a couple of religious experiences that I've caught on video. And so you can find them on a playlist called Breakthroughs to the Unconscious. And you will actually see these experiences that I had. And you'll see how I'm affected by them. Now, if you watch me have these experiences, you're not necessarily going to be affected in the same way because you have to have your own. But when they affected me, I knew, okay? And that's why when Dr. Jung said, "I have no need to believe, I know." And so these dead who were in Dr. Jung's vision hadn't found what they were seeking. They were seeking a spiritual religious experience by going to Jerusalem. And, you can just go to Jerusalem, and it's a very interesting place with lots of ancient things in it, um, for every religion. But it's not necessarily going to give you a religious experience. So at the beginning of the Seven Sermons to the Dead, these dead say to Dr. Jung, "We have come from Jerusalem where we have not found what we sought." And so that's the point, that they went to Jerusalem just as the Crusaders went to Jerusalem in the 12th century and 13th century. And, they controlled the region for 200 years. That was the so-called Kingdom of God period. And then they were chased out by Saladin. And I think it's Saladin. And, but they didn't make it into a holy place by doing that. Carlos says, nothing is supernatural, everything just is. Um, okay, that's fair enough. It just is either in the physical universe or the psychic universe. And Joseph Campbell says, I am aware he once owned a knife that broke into four pieces spontaneously. Yes, that's one of his stories. Carlos, Nick, yeah, true, but when someone says supernatural, what they really mean are things or experiences they don't fully understand, and we as humans are limited in our capabilities. Or when he was having a conversation with Freud, and there was a thump in a bookcase with King's prediction, which was a prediction. Skip, would you care to explain how that correlates with psyche? Um, well, random things happen, and you have an unconscious readiness for that to happen. For example, the Map of the Soul Persona album is happened, and from my point of view, that was totally random. I wasn't expecting it. I couldn't have predicted it, not for a second. But my psyche was ready for it. And so as soon as it happened, boom, I knew this is what I'm looking for. And I knew that this is the way that we're going to educate the world about psychology. It's going to happen this way. It's not going to happen because we get it in the schools or the universities. And so it's simply a readiness. And the tarot works that way also. As I've said a few times, I can walk into an auditorium with 1,000 people in it. I can take the tarot cards and throw them across the stage with no layout whatsoever, and I can simply read what I see on the floor, and everyone in the auditorium will think I read about them. And the reason is because the tarot is about archetypes and typical things that happen in everybody's life. And so if I read for 30 minutes, I'm going to hit something in everybody's psyche. It just happens that way. And okay, so going on. So it's just a readiness in answer to Joseph Campbell's question. Jerome, thanks, Skip. I would encourage anyone interested in their psychological type to explore the official Myers-Briggs Foundation website for a wealth of accurate information. Shakina says the archetypes of astrology I assume to be the anima, us, and the persona-based standards in the military. It all seems so Roman, so easily integrated as an understanding of self. But yeah, nah. Um, if you're a very rational person, you're not going to get it, and especially if you're out on the far end of the S scale. Um, and so, and what I'd say simply about astrology is, for thousands of years, people were talking about what a certain constellation in the sky meant at a certain time of year. And they talked about that among themselves time and time again for thousands of years. And what's true sticks, and what isn't true falls away. And so the result is it becomes more and more and more true. This is how the tarot cards developed, and it's also how the Chinese zodiac developed. I mean, the Chinese figured out that there's a cycle of 12 years, and these cycles are identifiable, and they apply to individuals of a certain time. And they've been working on this and talking about it for thousands of years, maybe 10,000 years. And as they develop that, it becomes more and more and more true. So if you go to a Chinese restaurant and you read about your zodiac sign on the placemat, you will probably think that they're talking about you. I certainly think that. I happen to be a dog year person, so if I read the description of a dog year person, it's exactly me. My wife is a snake year person, and she says the year of the snake is exactly her. And so that's how it develops. It's because what is true sticks, and what isn't true falls away. Nia, late again, but now here, Miles. It's an interesting idea of Jung that we are here to help those now dead to find the meaning. In other words, help those present and past live a full life of deeper values. Okay, let me give you a personal example of that. I was, for many, many years, decades, fairly disrespectful of my paternal grandfather. And the reason was that as long as I knew him, he was basically a sad sack. He had been a traveling salesman, so he fit the archetype of Willie Loman from Eugene O'Neill's play Death of a Salesman. And he was an alcoholic. When he was 58 years old, he had a stroke. He also smoked a pipe, and he had a stroke, and he was disabled thereafter. He lived another 10 years, and my grandmother had to nurse him for that entire 10 years. And so I was always pretty disrespectful of him. But over the years, since he died, I learned some more things about him. I learned that, number one, he lost his business in the crash of 1929, something that happened to me in 2008 with the crash of 2008. So it happened to me. I know it can happen. He lost his home to foreclosure when my father was 7 years old, and my aunt, who's still living, was a babe in arms. She doesn't even remember that. My father told me about it because he remembered it. It was obviously very traumatic for him at age 7 when he had to leave his home. And oh, by the way, I just lost my home to foreclosure after the 2008 crash. But then he kept going, and he was able to get his family living in a house on the main line in the Philadelphia area, so a fairly good area. He got his son into Friends Central, which is a Quaker school in Philadelphia, very famous. And when Americans saw that World War II was coming, he went around and tried to get my father an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy. And his congressman told him, well, I can't give you a political appointment because those are reserved for my political supporters. But if your son joins the Navy Reserve, then he can get into a special program which will allow him to go to university for 1 year to prepare to go to the Naval Academy, and then he can go to the Naval Academy. And so that's what happened. My father, in 1940, so just after World War II had begun in Europe, but long before it had begun for the Americans, My father joined the U.S. Navy as a sailor, as a seaman first class. He was trained in the reserve, and during the year that followed, he um, he went to the University of Pennsylvania, the same place our president went, and so he went to Penn for a year, and meanwhile he had met my mother at Friends Central, and after he did that, he was accepted into the U.S. Naval Academy in 1942. And so he spent the entire World War II at the U.S. Naval Academy. He graduated right at the time the war in Europe was over. And so what my grandfather did to his brilliance was um, he made my life possible by that. Because if my father had been drafted or gone into the fierce battles of World War II, it's very likely that he would have died, and then I would never be, and we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And so all of that, including this conversation right now, is thanks to my paternal grandfather, who I used to disrespect, but he still lives in me. I know him. I respect him now. And so the dead require our lives to give meaning to their lives, okay? And this very live stream that I'm doing right now is a meaningful thing for everybody that's listening to it because my grandfather lived. And I'm not going to go into it any further than that. So Miles, the dead may be here waiting for you on the other side to ask you questions when you arrive, but you can be on the other side in this life, okay? And the other side is actually in your unconscious. And so if you're, based on that story, you can get what I'm talking about. So it's like Grenade, something that both hard science and psychology can agree on is that the human brain is one of the most complex systems known to man. Agreed. Uh, and we're going to talk about that. Thanks, Skip. Have you ever read the Tarot here on YouTube? Yes, many times, and you can find an entire playlist on the main homepage of this channel where I train you in 18 videos how to read the tarot. So, the Persona video games use the tarot archetypes, matching them up with each of the main characters and side characters. Great. That is important that are important to the story. That's interesting. So they know that. Carlos, is Jung's individuation process the same thing as Nietzsche's bridge to the Superman? I'm going to hold that question aside. I can't really answer that one on the fly because I'm not a great Nietzsche expert. I read Thus Spake Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil and a few of those things. But the Superman was probably misunderstood because Hitler used the Superman as an example of Superman and super strength, right? And I don't think that's how Nietzsche meant it, and and that's not how Jung ever meant it. And I think Nietzsche meant it as a connection to the unconscious also. And Carlos says, my great-grandfather made my life possible. It's probably why I'm drawn to your videos. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Carlos. And Mia says, I miss Persona game. Miles, Yes, the dead are here is another way of expressing that time and space are probably only a concept on this side. Correct. Okay, now I'm going to go back through what I know about this new album as of today, which isn't a lot. Um, but we've already talked about the intro persona track, and Kim Namjoon trying to figure out who he is, and talking about the persona. So there's the imagery, which is quite amazing, of Kim Namjoon and the big pink genie, which is his persona that can get out of control in that video. And so all of these images are hugely Jungian images. And the point is that if you're an artist, especially if you're a music star, the tendency is to get inflated. And all of us need to watch for inflation, because we're going through the rocks that Odysseus went through. On one side is inflation, on the other side is depression. And we have to go through the straight, through the middle way, in order to live our lives properly. And so Kim Namjoon's point, and what Dr. Stein complimented him on, was the fact that he could be quite inflated, especially after having the honor at age 24 to give a speech at the UN. My goodness, that's a huge accolade already. And yesterday we were already talking about the possibility that as BTS goes forward and gets recognized by more and more older folks like me, there's a distinct possibility that they could be eligible for the Nobel Peace Prize because of their ability to bring people together and their ability to talk about love and to talk about the compensation to the authoritarianism that we're seeing in the world, and the educational aspects of what they're doing. All those things point to the possibility that they could be cited for a Nobel Peace Prize. Maybe not this year. I mean, these things take a little bit of time to get through the system. And so far, everybody that I asked about BTS either had never heard of them or had heard of them only vaguely. And this is at a time when they already have 80 million followers or fans, and they already have dropped an album this morning that's already #1 in 70 countries. Phenomenal. And yet they're almost unknown. Tomorrow that's going to change because they're going to be on Saturday Night Live tomorrow. And so lots of people are going to be talking about them as of tomorrow. And so that's going to change very fast. Whether that's in time for this year's Nobel Peace Prize, yeah, maybe not. I mean, it's already April, and they announce it in, I think, in December, November, December. So it may not be possible for this year, but next year it might be. I mean, it just depends on what the results are. And then there's the idea of Kim Namjoon winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. I think that is premature, because the only singing artist or songwriter that's done that so far is Bob Dylan, and he wrote and sang for more than 40 years before he was recognized. So it might be a stretch for the Nobel Prize for Literature, but for the Peace Prize, it's definitely a possibility. Okay, so the second song is Make It Right, and that was a collaboration with Ed Sheeran. And so what I can say about that. I haven't seen a music video for it yet, but what I think is brilliant is that BTS has collaborated with these very famous people. And you may not know that Ed Sheeran has the fourth most successful concert tour in history. And so the concert tour that BTS maybe is launching on now, where they're already going to be at four stadiums, and I heard at some stadiums they're charging $2,200 a seat, and so I think it's very possible that their tour for the Persona album is going to be the top tour very soon. I mean, obviously that takes time because to get on that to that level took. Well, let me just give it to you because I looked it up this morning. So the top tour uh, in the world was U2, and it was their 360-degree tour, and they did 110 shows, and they made $820 million. That's almost $1 billion. And it was seen by 7.2 million people. That was number one. Number two was Guns N' Roses. They did 159 uh, concerts. They made $563 million. This is all inflation adjusted. And they were seen by 4.3 million. Number three was the Rolling Stones. They did a bigger bang tour. Ironically, number three tour is a bigger bang tour by the Rolling Stones, and they did 144 concerts. They made $674 million, and they were seen by 4.6 million people. And then comes number four, and that's Ed Sheeran. And officially, that tour is still on, and it's his division sign tour. And that has had 205 concerts, so more concerts than any other in that top group. And he has so far, as number four on the list, made 556 million, and it's been seen by 6.3 million people. But I think you can pretty much be assured that this BTS tour that they're on right now is going to exceed that. And so that's very impressive. Um, Now, the third song, Jamais Vu, we were talking about it the other day because I didn't know the French. And I'm told that it's the opposite of déjà vu, meaning already seen. Jamais vu means never seen. That's all I know about it. So I haven't had a chance to even listen to that song. Now, the brilliant one, the true brilliant one, in terms of collaborations, and we have the Ed Sheeran collaboration, which is brilliant, and I'm saying that from a marketing point of view, okay, not a Jungian point of view. But the truly brilliant one is Boy with Love featuring Halsey. Now, what does that do? Well, Halsey is already an anima carrier for tens of millions of young men around the world. And she's an extremely successful artist. She's just about the age of Kim Namjoon. I think she might be a year older. And the fact that they've brought into their album, obviously she's there to be an anima carrier. And obviously she's going to appeal to young men around the world. Okay, no doubt about it. The anima of young men who are watching this music video is going to be grabbed by Halsey. And so that's a brilliant marketing ploy. It's a brilliant archetypal thing. And what we're going to see is more and more collaborations that are international now, because here we have this Korean group, BTS, who's come and taken one of the lead or a leading man and a leading woman from the American scene and brought them into their music. And so now all musicians and all famous singers and dancers and so on are going to start doing that. Okay, so there'll be collaborations all across, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some young Korean anima appear in American uh, music videos, and then all around the world. You know, Brazilian groups who, have Koreans or Japanese or Singaporeans or Arabs, whatever it is. And so there's going to be this cross fertilization, number one. And number two, there is going to be more and more interest among singer songwriters about archetypal issues, number one, and about maybe conveying something that's educational in their songs, which will be terrific. It's a way to educate young people very quickly, and that's going to happen, and that's already happened in this Boy with Love featuring Halsey. So BTS has grabbed this opportunity, and it's a brilliant, brilliant marketing strategy, just the collaboration between them and Halsey and Ed Sheeran. But besides that, from an archetypal point of view, it also is connecting in to the archetypal level. So that this means the unconscious level, it's going to be awesome. Okay, Microcosmos is very interesting. I did see that, and I saw the words of it, and the point is that each of us has a universe in our psyche, and that universe is actually bigger than the universe that's out here, and it's far bigger. And I actually wrote a essay about Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan a few years back, which I am going to link under this video. And I haven't done it yet, but within the next few hours, that link will be there. And I wrote this essay, which I called Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson Missed an Entire Universe. And then years later, a year later or something, I'm thinking about that, and I said, wait a minute. They didn't miss one universe. They missed 7.5 billion universes, because everybody's universe in their psyche is different. And it is a microcosmos. And this is what BTS is talking about in the lyrics of this song, which I did get to see. And so I'm very excited, because I didn't know how can I convey this to Neil deGrasse Tyson. And obviously he's been, like a, steel trap, rational mind type of guy. And so he doesn't see another universe. And yet, as I point out on that essay, and I linked a video of his, he's trying to describe dark matter and dark energy. And the way he describes it sounds like he's describing the tarot. Okay, it literally sounds irrational on the irrational side, not the rational side. And yet he doesn't understand that. And yet he's describing dark matter and dark energy in the physical universe as if he was describing something that's in the irrational side, but he doesn't get it. He hasn't grokked it yet, or at least I haven't seen him grok it yet. And so I'm terribly excited, because finally, and you'll see when I give you this link, that more than 10,000 people have read this essay, but I still haven't heard any connection that got through to Neil deGrasse Tyson. So somebody might want to tell him. but the point is, each one of us has within us a microcosm, and in our psyche. And so the song Microcosmos is really about that. And so that's a brilliant contribution. Um, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, it's 7. Okay. Okay, so then there's this song Home. And I think that Home is, I haven't seen it yet, but I think it's about the Oedipus complex, which is that, at some point in our life, we all want to go home. We all want to go back to be in the bosom of our family as we were when we were little children. And that's what the Oedipus complex, which Dr. Freud, that's the one archetype that Dr. Jung gave him credit for identifying. We all have this urge to want to go home. That's archetypal. And you see it in the book, movie, and theater play Peter Pan. Okay, in Peter Pan, Peter and the Lost Boys want to be in Never Never Land. Never Never Land means that they're not going to enter life, okay, that they're not going to become mature human beings. Instead, they want to stay to be little boys. And that's a function of the Oedipus complex. And so I suspect that this home is about this yearning that all of us have at some point where we've done something out in the world and we're a bit homesick. We want to go home. It doesn't mean what Dr. Freud said. Dr. Freud said that it's the desire of young men to want to make love with their mother. Well, it's not that at all. And the electric complex is the desire of young women to want to make love with their father. And that's not what it's about at all. But it is about this urge to want to go back to a more peaceful time when we were little children. Everything was being taken care of for us. And so you think about it, when you know a little child that's a year or two old, they're like little kings and queens, right? Because if they don't get what they want, they just scream until they get it. And so that's a good time for them because they'll get what they want. and so at some level, and it doesn't necessarily mean at the toddler level, but it can mean, maybe the first 10 or 12 years of life up till puberty, you are you're pretty much taken care of in all societies, most societies, let's say, and then you have to start actually doing things and prepare to go out into maturity. But everybody has a yearning to want to go back to that, and I suspect that that's what this home is about. And then Dionysus, and I did read about Dionysus yesterday, and it seems that this Dionysus, and I haven't seen the video yet, but Dionysus is about initiation. And so in ancient Greece, people would go out and get drunk and they'd relax. When you're a child and people give you all the rules and you learn all the rules and you're all tight and you're going to do everything perfectly and you're not going to break any of the 10 Commandments or whatever it is. And then something happens and you have to be initiated and see what maturity means. And so the Maasai in Africa, the Maasai tribe, for example, have an initiation where a boy at age 12 gets put out in front of the tribe, and then they herd a lion toward him. So the lion attacks him, and the boy has to respond with only a spear, and he has to feel the fear of being attacked by that lion, because once he feels that fear, then he knows what maturity really means and what he has to deal with in life, and that's an initiation. Another initiation is the the U.S. Marines. You know, there's this uh, motto, the Marine Corps builds men. Well, it does build men because it's initiation. And once you get through your basic training or your officer candidate school, then you've been initiated, and then you can call yourself a Marine. You can't call yourself a Marine until you've completed either basic training or officer candidate school. And so that's an initiation process. And once you do it, once a Marine, always a Marine. It never leaves you, and you always have it. And so that's what initiation is about. And I suspect, um, at, at least at some level, that's what Dionysus is about. Okay, so that's the 7 songs that are in this album to the extent I know. And so let me go back and catch some of your responses here. We've been going for 2 hours, so I will need to stop within the next half hour or so. But so Nia said, before Halsey, they collaborated with Nicki Minaj, who also drew new male fans to the group. I'm sure that's true. Wait a minute. I'm trying to get back to where I left off. Okay. So Grenade said, like a drama play or movie of some sort. Yes, dramas, plays, and movies do put an image in your mind, and so that may teach you something. And I've seen, thousands of movies in my lifetime. I've always loved to go to movies. And what happens to me now is when something happens, immediately a movie and a specific scene of a movie will come up in my mind. And that scene would have taught me something I needed to do. Now, Perla, I don't speak Spanish. And I think what she's saying here is that she needs to be able to take this in Spanish. So I hope there are translators who can work on some of these videos. I don't speak Spanish. Normally, when I see a response like this on my channel or my website, I use a machine translation so that I can communicate with you, but I don't have access to that at this moment, so I can't be sure what you said. But I think what Perla is saying is that she needs translation into Spanish. And I do have a subscriber named Pablo Morano. He's from Chile. And I know that the other night he started to do live streams in Spanish. So you might want to try to look him up. His name is Pablo Morano, Morano. And so I'm sure there will be Spanish videos soon. Miles says, what was the #1 tout? I don't know what that is. Angel is, on first few listens to the album today, I've been loving the song Make It Right at the moment. Okay, I haven't listened to that one yet. Nia, I believe Make It Right is a song for the fans. They often address fans. In this one, they say the trophies are nice, but their aim was reaching us. Fans are the answer to the journey. Right, okay, so the point is that having the relationship with the fans is more valuable than any of the money or any of the other things that they get, because it gives them a relationship with you. And Inspired says, could you click on the option to accept subs later so we can add subs on your videos in different languages? I've already done that, Inspired, so you should be able to do it. If you are unable to do that, please send me a tweet to skip_Conover on Twitter, or a email, and I will work with it some more, but I think I've already done that. And yeah, before Halsey, they collaborated with Nicki Minaj, and that drew in people. Carlos says, very interesting discussion on Neil deGrasse Tyson, interpretation of dark matter. Miles, a report of near-death experiences, seeing a replay of your life and review of not your bank account, but the beings you might have hurt, and this might be what the other side will ask about. Could be. Um, yeah, another song that vaguely mentions the concept of microcosmos is Magic Shop. They say they believe in fans, galaxies, stars, and Milky Way. Very interesting. I'll look into that. Nia. Grenade, the Oedipus complex and electric complex points to the archetype of what a good father or mother should look like unconsciously, which of course factors into who we choose as partners. Interesting. Uh, Also can choose the opposite of that archetype based on our feelings about it, but it's centered around the archetype and comparing to it. And, in the case of my first marriage, it is very possible that my first wife did select someone who is opposite her father. It's possible. And that would have been unconscious both to her and to me. But then, because we hadn't been educated enough in psychology at the time, we didn't understand that and we couldn't work with it. Whereas nowadays, I understand what I need to do with my wife to work with her, because if you go into a marriage, you should both take the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and the basic rule, it's not always, but basic rule for a successful marriage now is to have two or three of these categories the same. If they're four different, then you're going to always be at each other's throats and you're always going to be fighting. If it's four the same, it's going to be too boring and nothing will happen in your life. But if you have two or three that are the same, you're going to be in good shape. My wife and I have three the same and one different. And the one that we have different is judging and perceiving. A judging person goes to the grocery store with a list, that's my wife, and a perceiving person goes to the grocery store without a list and just goes up and down the aisle and takes things off the shelves. My wife gets all the staples on her list, and I buy the ice cream. So both eat, though. And so it works pretty well for us. Um, Mia says, have you read all BTS translation lyrics for this Persona album? Absolutely not. I've seen only a couple. Um, and I will be looking at them in the next few days as time permits. Nia, if you're interested in the intended meaning of the Korean lyrics, I'll translate them anyway. I can email if I find something interesting lost in translation or upload to Twitter if better. Please do. The more information I can take in, the better I can react to these things. Miles, your intuition is right, Skip. BTS is huge for psychology, and I've got strength. I like how BTS reference Korean musical instruments used in folk performing arts, including shamanic music, dance, mask dance, drama. They also mention Korean dance on Heya. There's a video on YouTube. Yes, I've seen that, and it is very interesting. I really appreciated that video. And I guess you meant Dionysus, but I mean another one because I haven't seen Dionysus yet. Okay. And Meme says, please also listen to Singularity, sung by Taehyung, written by RM and Tae of BTS. Okay, I will look for it. Singularity. Thank you for that. Okay, I am going to wrap up here in within the next couple of minutes. If you have any last thoughts to say, please do. I don't know what happens on this top chat business, but anyway. Okay, I would have to discontinue at this point. We've been going for 2 hours and 10 minutes, and I need to spend some time working on my technology so that when I live stream tomorrow, I will have better technology, hopefully. And so thank you for joining me today. I will go on with reading a small part of Dr. Stein's book tomorrow and comment on that as a help to BTS Army members. But you're going to have to either get a audible.com version of his book or the whole book itself to fully appreciate what BTS was looking at when they started to think about this particular album. And in future live streams, I am going to go back to some of the earlier albums and start talking about the archetypes and so on that they've put in those albums. But as I say, my sense of it is that, you know, in the tradition of American country western music, which none of you may like, and I sometimes like, you know, but what American country western music, in fact, all successful music does draw from the archetypes, but American country music especially does talk about the phases of life and the hurts and the trials and tribulations of life very heavily. And so I see a correspondence between country western music and this music because it's also talking about the trials and tribulations of life. And it's getting through to people all over the world. Just amazing what they're doing. And so I think that that's really terrific. And I've got strength. Can't wait for future discussions. Okay, I'll save up my voice and hopefully we'll have some more conversations over the next few days. I'm intending to try to do this every day at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And you're quite welcome. And Angel says, thank you for an insightful and at times moving time today. Can't wait for future discussions. Okay, so peace, and that's peace, and live long and prosper. I don't know if I can do that with my fingers. I guess I can. Live long and prosper,